Today we're going to be making our family name sign. I know a lot of you guys are doing these for Christmas, so I'm excited to get these done. So you should have your kit with a lot of your materials that you need. All you need to add is a pair of scissors and a glue gun. So in your bag you should have a glue stick, so if you need extra you can use that. But I'm just going to pull out some of this stuff and set it aside. So I have my little flowers and my ribbons. We'll work on that in just a little bit. So we'll kind of set that here. All right, and then we'll get started. So first thing we're going to do on our wooden board is we're going to do our background color. And on this one, it has a all brown background color. So I'm just going to start with this little brown one. If it's got some liquid on the top, or if you see some separation, just shake it a little bit before you get started. That way it'll mix it up a little bit more. All right, I'm going to pop this open. Now, doesn't matter which sponge you use. Okay, so on this, I really like the wood grain of this wood, so I'm going to try to go thin on here, and I'm going to try to stay in the same direction as my wood grain so I can still kind of see that when I get done. So I'm going to go on one end and go from one end to the other. That helps to kind of cover up any of the streaking, like when you overlap. So when you first dip and you put the stain on here, it goes on a little bit thick. So you want to just kind of keep stretching out and keep stretching out, just go back and forth until you can get that real pretty grain color that you can see here, okay? So if you have to dip again, I kind of just keep on trucking. I just keep going, start my next little section. Just try not to overlap too terribly much, and just keep stretching that stain as far as it'll go. Just that way you don't have any kind of real blotchy spots. This one has that white section on it, so even if it's not perfect, or if you have little splotches, it's not going to matter. You're not going to be able to see it, okay? So I'm going to keep going. One more dip. So it doesn't take a whole ton of this. Kind of my rule of thumb for putting the stain on this wood is really I want it to dry almost by the time I'm to the other side of the wood. So basically, by the time I get to the other end, it's really almost dry. So I'm going back and touching up just a little bit. So it might be a little bit wet for just a minute, but for the most part, I can already see parts of it are dry. These wooden circles right here, they are like laser cut, which is kind of neat because what you end up with is a nice dark edge. So for our project when we're using stain, it's great. So you don't have to do the sides. So the sides like already match your front, so it already looks really cool. So you can just leave those. All right, so we're going to talk about what we're going to do next. So on the sample piece, there's definitely like a brown section on the top that revealed the stain, and then you have the white on the bottom. I'm going to do something a little bit different just because I want to also add a little bit of brown on the bottom. If you don't want to do that, like if you look at the sample picture and you think, I want it to look exactly like this, then I'll tell you, of course, how to do that as well. But I'm going to add a little bit of brown on the bottom because I kind of like the contrast in that too. So you can see I'm just going to do welcome so that it's just generic, but you will have your personal stencil in there. And then we have these two strips. So these little two strips right here, they're going to be kind of what blocks off our section so that we can do that white area in here, okay? So these do not have transfer tape on them. You're just going to take them off by hand and just place them, okay? So now I'm going to kind of get an idea of, I'm going to go ahead and cut my little welcome. For you, it would be cutting out your name section. I'm going to cut it kind of close to the black, just so I can get an idea of where on my sign this is going to go, okay? So if I just lay this on top, so I'm not putting it on yet, I'm just laying it here just to kind of get an idea, okay, this is where I want it to go, it's going to fit right here. If I know that's going to fit about there, then that gives me an idea of where I could do that little brown section on the top and where I need to put my my black tape on the top section, I'm sorry, the brown section on the bottom, and the tape I can put at the top to leave that brown section on the top, okay? Because I like to have that stained area underneath the bow. All right, so now I kind of see, all right, this is about where I want my, my white area to be. So I'm going to take one of these long little pieces, and I'm just going to go across the board. So the first one doesn't matter too much because you're not making it perpendicular to anything, or parallel, I guess. Excuse me, used the wrong math term. But for this one, what I did is I just kind of took the bottom two corners of the black vinyl, and those touch, excuse me, those touch right on the edge of the circle. So let me put it on here and then I'll show you. Okay, so I kind of put it, this is not, doesn't have to be exact, so this could be different, but for me, I did it like where this bottom corner and this bottom corner, they touch across the circle. That kind of gives me the longest spot that I can go, okay? And then I get the idea that, okay, this is going to be about this size, okay? So I can put my other black stripe, if I want it, anywhere down here. So I just want like a real small little kind of black section, brown section down here. So I'm going to put my black stripe down there. Now, if you're going to do that, the only thing you have to be careful of is when I go to put this one on here right now, I need to make sure that it's parallel with this section up here. Because that way we have like a straight line here and a straight line here. Okay, so if you want to do that, I'll show you, and then I'll hold it up so you can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to take this one. I'll have to stand up for that. And then I'm going to put it down here. Like I said, I'm just looking up here at this top stripe, and I'm just making sure that they're parallel to each other. It's not really hard. And the other thing is that this can come off super easily, so since we're placing it by hand, even if you put it on and then if you hold it up, I can see, I'm going to fold this back to make it a little bit easier to see. So I kind of want to see, are these parallel to each other? If they're crooked at all, or if you don't like it, it's super easy to just peel this bottom one off and re-put it back on, okay? So you can just keep putting it back on until you think it's nice and straight. So kind of just hold it up. Looks good. Okay, so now I have my little section taped off. I'm going to go and do this little inside part with my white paint, okay? So let me get my new sponge with my white. I'm going to set the brown aside because I am known for spilling these paints. So I'm going to take my new sponge and I'm going to dip. Anytime I'm dipping it at first, it's a little bit hard to get it to soak up that paint, but I'm going to keep dipping. I'm going to wipe it down on the side, okay? So my goal here is to have sponge texture and not a ton of paint on there, okay? So I kind of wipe it off and get me a good little paint right here. And now I'm going to fill this inside part, all right? If you want it to look kind of wood grainy or streaky, you can definitely wipe it like that. It's going to give it a little bit more of a rustic feel, but if you want it to look, I kind of feel like maybe a little bit more professional, but I guess you could say more fine-tuned, then you definitely want to like do this bouncing motion, okay? And that's just kind of like bouncing your sponge up and down. You know, I'm just going to take it like this, and I kind of work in these little circles. This takes a little bit longer than, of course, just like smothering the paint on, but I really like the way that it looks in the end, okay? So, you can, of course, you can try it the other way if you want to just wipe it on, but you might say, it doesn't give me quite as much coverage as I was hoping for, and then you could always go back with this little bouncing technique. So you don't get a ton of coverage out of each sponge dip, so you'll want to kind of go back and dip it again if you need to, okay? So like I said, I'm just working in these little circles, but I kind of like to spread this paint out as far as I can go. I don't want it to be thick. I definitely don't want to have any like major sponge texture on here, and I just want to keep spreading it, which it kind of makes your hand a little bit tired, which I think is why we're all like, you know, we just want to go in there and rub it side to side. But I did the first one like that just to kind of see what it would be like if I could cut that corner, and I really just didn't like the way that it looked necessarily. So I think this will be worth your time. It really only takes a couple extra minutes, okay? So again, just going back in here, there's not really like a set pattern on the way that you have to do it, okay? So we're just going to go around, and sometimes when it starts to dry, because we're using the sponge, it kind of puts a little bit of air pockets into this paint. So sometimes by the time you get to the other end of the sign, the first part might have some little spots that you can see some brown through again. So if that bothers you, or if you notice that, you will want to just kind of make your way back around and touch up those little spots again, okay? So let me finish this up real quick. All right. And once you're finished with this little section, we're actually going to peel up the black, the little vinyl stripes that we put on here. That'll just help it to dry a little bit quicker, okay? So I'm going back, I'm just looking, making sure I have good coverage, but again, not super thick. I don't want to see, like, if I can see the last place that I touched the sponge down, that probably means I have way too much paint. If you get too much paint, some advice would be to just flip your sponge over and use the dry side to again, just bounce all the way over here. And if you do that, that will just help pick up some of the spots that might be too wet, okay? So if you need to, you can do that. If not, we're just gonna let this dry, okay? So let me put this lid back on here, set this sponge aside, wipe my fingers. All right, and then, just like I said I would, I'm gonna peel up this vinyl. So I'm just being careful not to touch anywhere on the brown with my, wet fingers or anything. I'm just gonna peel up these little vinyl pieces. These are now trash. And again, I don't want to get it on my sign because those are definitely wet and I don't want to get them on me. So I'm going to just set them aside for now. All right, so I'm going to grab this one since I folded it around the back. All right, so I'm just peeling that off. They should come off real easily. Okay, and then we set those aside. So check that out. So that's what I mean. So on the sample piece, this was all white all the way down. And I just wanted to add a little bit of brown on the bottom to give it a little bit more character, okay? So I just cut that off. I like the way that looks. I need this to dry. We're gonna wait for this to dry. So just set that aside, that in your stencil, and we're gonna go ahead and work on your bow, okay? So we're basically making two bows and putting them together. So you should have several different pieces. You have a long piece of this natural ribbon. You should have a long piece of the black and white burlap. You should have a short piece of the natural ribbon, and you should have a little piece of twine, okay? So the short piece of burlap is actually just gonna be the loop that hangs your your whole sign, excuse me. So we're really gonna just take it and cross over the two ends, and just like that, that's just gonna what we use to hang up your sign. So we're gonna glue that on the very back. So now I'm gonna just kind of make the bow here, and then whenever my sign is done and dry, we'll be able to actually apply the bow on there, but I don't want to get any paint on it right now. So for this first step, I'm just gonna glue these two little pieces together. Use a tiny bit of my glue, and just be careful as you squeeze that. So kind of holding it apart, like I said, kind of like a little ribbon right here. Now, just be careful when you squeeze these together when you've got hot glue because it'll just come right through, so I don't want you to burn yourself. So I'm just really kind of dabbing with my fingers and being careful to let that dry, but also not to burn myself. All right? All right, so I'm going to set that aside. Now, we've got this big one, and for this one, we're going to be making 2 layers. So we're going to have a kind of bigger bow and a smaller bow. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to kind of take this section and fold it and kind of think, okay, if this was and I'm really just estimating sizes right here for just a second. So if I think, okay, if this is my big bow, then could I also fit a small bow on there? Okay. And the answer is yes. So I have a big bow and a small bow. Now, it's a little bit easier to do it when they're separate, so I'm actually going to cut these into 2 different pieces. So one will be a little bit longer than the other. So this is not rocket science, don't worry. So really what you could do is kind of fold it in half, but make the longer piece, let's say 4 squares longer than the shorter piece, okay? So I'm laying them on top. I've got this piece, it's got 4 extra squares on it, and then I'm going to cut that in half, okay? So if I cut that in half, and I end up with a longer piece and a shorter piece. So for my longer piece, I'm just going to fold it in towards the middle. Okay, so that's kind of like my first loop to my big bow. Now, I'm just going to hot glue that a little bit. Move this real quick. All right, so I'm going to hot glue that. The way I do that is I had it folded together, so I know this is what my bow is going to look like. I just unfold this one while I'm kind of holding this one still, and that way I know exactly where I'm going to hot glue that. So just put a little bit of hot glue on there. You don't need a ton because we're going to tie this bow together and everything. So just a little bit to get that to stick and not come apart whenever we tie it together. And then I'm going to put a little bit more sure my loops are about the same size and get that little symmetry there when it comes to the bow, which you'll be able to even out if you're a little bit off, so don't stress too much about that. All right, so we've got that big loop. I'm gonna do the same thing with my little one. So I'm gonna go face down, fold it over, fold it over. I'm overlapping just a tiny bit, kind of seeing that I have the right size. I let go of one side, and then I'm gonna just hold that where it goes, put a little bit of hot glue, and glue that one down. Easy breezy. All right, and then put a little bit more hot glue on this edge, and glue that one down. Okay, so now I ended up with a big loop and a little loop. All right, and then for these, when we're gonna put these together, now I've got like a seam on the big one and a seam on the little one. We want those seams to face each other. So I'm just gonna flip that little one over and lay it on top. That way I shouldn't have any seams showing in the end when I tie the bow together, okay? So I'm gonna set this aside. You check on my paint, how we're doing. Okay, so that's still wet, so we're gonna keep going on the bow. I don't know if we should stop and do the next step or not yet. But this one, we're gonna cut off a couple things on here. So first, we're gonna cut off just, probably, I said a couple things, but really we're only gonna cut off one. So I would say probably about 5 or 6 inches, okay? So we're gonna save this piece. We wanna use this piece to do like the little middle part of our bow. And I'll show you that of course at the end. But then this next part is really almost just like tying a regular bow, but we're not really gonna tie it, we're gonna kind of fake tie it. We're literally just gonna take the 2 pieces, so it's laid down. I'm gonna take the 2 pieces and I'm gonna lay them over each other. Okay, not hard at all. Okay, so I'm gonna lay them over each other like that, and that's it. So I kind of, there you go, I just kind of crisscrossed it like this. Okay, so now I have all of these different layers. So I'm laying this on top of these 2 layers here. So I have big burlap, little burlap, and then just kind of like my pseudo bow on here. And everything's gonna get tied together with this twine, okay? So I got my twine, I laid it right across, and then I'm gonna kind of just pick it all up in one, and really I wanna just tie it towards the back. So I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna flip it over. It's okay if that ribbon gets a little bit smushed because it's got wire in it, so we'll be able to make it look a little bit better in just a second. So now the goal is to tie this like as tight as you can pretty much. So I'm gonna take it and I've got it right in the middle and I'm just gonna pull it tight. I kind of like the little edges of the burlap to face towards the back. So if you start to pull them and they go towards the front, then I kind of just bend them back towards the back so that those edges are all kind of on the back of the bow. So I'm tying it, pulling it very tight, and then I'm just gonna tie that in a little knot, okay? If you want the tails of this jute to show, then you can just leave it. I'm gonna double knot it. If you don't want them to show, then you can just trim those off, okay? So you can just kind of decide whether or not you like the look of that, that jute on there, okay? And then, so I'm just gonna go in here and fluff these just a little bit so I can kind of start to see what my bow is gonna look like. So I just kind of go in here and fluff these loops just a tiny bit, okay? And I pull the tails down some on this, fluff that. I kind of just stick my fingers in here, kind of like 3, and then kind of open them up. This side was a little bit small, so I can only get a couple fingers in there, but that's okay. So go in there, pull it apart, just to open those loops and give them a little bit more volume. All right, so now that's what we're looking like so far. So there are a couple things I like to always do. So on my tails of my ribbon, I always put them together and fold them. And once I fold them, I'm just going to trim it at a 45-degree angle away from the wire, okay? So if I've got the wire here, then I'm just going to go 45 degrees up from that. And then it kind of gives me those fancy little looks on the tails of that, okay? And these might be a little bit too long, but I can't really tell until I get it on the sign. So once I put it on the sign, I might trim these a little bit more, and that would be no big deal. Okay, so the last thing I want to do on this is I want to cover that jute in the middle of this and make it look a little bit more substantial. So I'm actually going to fold this in half and kind of see if I want to do that. Let's see. I think I'm actually going to fold it in thirds. I'm going to fold kind of, that way I don't have the one seam on one side. So I kind of folded this part towards the middle and then this side towards the middle. All right, and that way you don't have any of those little seams showing to make it look like off. And I'm going to use that to wrap all around the middle of this bow to cover up that jute, okay? So then I'm going to go to the back of the bow, and I'm just going to glue it. So we're kind of just hiding everything in the back, okay? So I'm going to glue this little piece on here and kind of hold it down for just a second. All right, and then just one more little glue here. Let me get my next glue stick. Oh, I can't get it going yet. Almost. All right, and then I hold that one on the back. All right, so I just keep smushing my little brown bow, but that's okay because I'll be able to fluff it up in the end. Okay. So let's see, now I've got this little piece across the middle that has covered up all of that. All right, so you should have plenty of material just to kind of play with that a little bit and just make that the way that you want that to look. Okay. So I think on this one I'm going to trim off my jute. You don't have to. Again, if you like it, you can leave it. But I'm going to trim off mine. And then I'm going to set this aside because we're going to go ahead and get started with our next part. And we'll come back to the bow. Alright, so let me set this over here. Leave my glue gun so I don't burn my elbow. Let's see if this one agree with me. Okay, there we go. Got it. Alright, let me take a drink. And we'll get going. Alright, let me check this because you really do not want to do this next step until this part is dry, okay? Which is a little bit harder to do when you're making the video. You will have plenty of time. I would say this is a good step to go get a drink or, go hang out, go talk for just a minute. So you might want to pause and give yourself a little bit of time. So when I'm looking at this and I hold it up to the light, it's still kind of shiny a little bit. So I want to wait just a minute to try to get this to be really, really dry, okay? Because we don't want to rip up all of our paint whenever we put our stencil on here, okay? So I'm going to let mine dry for just a second. All right, so we are going to be working on getting our stencil on next. So you're going to need your little transfer, this is called a scraper. So you're going to need your scraper, and we've already pulled out the vinyl. So usually when we do these like in person, we would actually have to pull out the letters and we put the transfer tape on. We've already done that. So at least hopefully that'll be a little bit easy for you. Alright, so we have, you see, you have your stencil and you also have some clear paper that's over the top. This is called transfer tape, and the job of the transfer tape is to transfer this black vinyl onto your project so that you can paint, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scrape on here really good. Alright, and now that I've scraped, I'm just going to kind of take the transfer tape and take that black vinyl and I'm just going to start peeling it, okay? I like to peel at a diagonal. I feel like that works better for these fancy letters. And I should be able to just keep peeling and try to get everything off, okay? I like it when it messes up because I can show you what to do, but sometimes it doesn't. So this was like perfect vinyl. It just peeled right off. But if you ever have any letter that doesn't come off or you just can't get, either you can scrape it again, or if you're like almost at the end like this, you just take one finger on the front and one on the back and you kind of just pinch that one little spot and that'll help you to peel all of it off, okay? So your goal at this point is to have a blank white piece of paper, which is now trash, so you can set that aside, and then you have your clear transfer tape with your stencil on it, okay? Alright, so mine is like right on the verge of dry, so I'm going to kind of press my luck a little bit. Please don't press your luck. You wait until it's like super dry, okay? So mine's getting there. Alright, so now we're going to apply this stencil. So all you have to do is just make sure that your lines line up pretty good with your lines that are already on here. So that's how you'll know that this is nice and straight. Okay, so I'm just looking at that bottom white line and that top white line, and I'm just making sure that my vinyl, because that's cut in a perfect square or perfect rectangle, but it has perfectly straight lines. So I'm making sure that those run parallel, and then I can use it to kind of center on both sides where I want that word or that name to go. Okay? So until I really start scraping, I have some wiggle room to putting the stencil down. So like I said, feel free to just kind of move it around and see. But like I said, when I was putting it on here, I was looking at this top of the black vinyl and I was matching it with this white line right here, and I'm just making sure that it's parallel, okay? And that's how I'll know that it's straight. But don't stress and don't worry, because with this cursive writing, it's great because you can't really tell if you get it too crooked. If you have the date on yours, you'll just want to keep an eye on that and make sure that that one really looks straight, because that's more of a straight font. But anything that's like the cursive font, you can't really tell if it's a little bit off. But for that date, just make sure that you can think that that looks really straight compared to your bottom line, if you have that. Okay? So I've got that on there. And now, I'm going to go back and scrape this, because now I want to get that black vinyl to stick. Okay? So let me scrape this black vinyl on here. Kind of good. Alright, so once we do that, then we're going to peel that clear off, okay? So again, I like to do everything kind of at a diagonal when I'm working with vinyl, so I'm just going to start peeling at that corner and just slowly peeling away. And my goal is for all that black to stay behind, okay? Alright, so now for a quick little tip that I always do on these vinyl signs is I'm going to go back and take my sponge that has my, my white on it. I don't want to dip it again because it doesn't need to be wet. I want it to barely have any paint on it. And I'm going to do a super light coat on here, okay? So I call this sealing the stencil. And we do this because that way the goal is if anything leaks, it's going to leak in this white color and it's not going to leak in the black color, okay? So it's not going to eliminate all leaking, but hopefully a pretty good amount, so they can look very professional in the end. So I'm going back and I'm actually dabbing it or wiping it some with my dry sponge because I had a lot on my vinyl and I want it to dry quickly so I can keep going. Okay, let me wipe my fingers off. Alright, so you probably want to wait a few minutes and let that dry. Again, just hold it up to the light and kind of move it and see, okay, is it nice and dry? But I'm ready to keep going. But you probably want to wait a few minutes to make sure that part's really dry. And then we're going to go to our black. And we're following the same rule that we followed with the white. We're going to dip, and we're going to wipe it off on the side, and we want to see sponge texture, okay? We don't want to see globs of paint. We want to see that sponge, all right? And now, when I put it on here, I still want to be able to see my lettering, okay? So it doesn't really matter where you start. I'm just like jumping that sponge up and down, trying to get all of those letters covered, okay? So if I hold this up, or even right now, I've kind of got a little bit of an angle where the light is shining on it, then I should still be able to see the outline of those letters on here, okay? If I'm putting so much paint on here that all I can see is like the texture of paint, then you're probably going to have some leakage, and you may not be happy with your outcome of your sign. So I really want you to be careful just to put enough. We want good coverage, of course, because this black, however it looks on here, is how the final product is going to look. We just don't want so much that you can't see the stencil at all anymore. So I should be able to lightly see the outline of all of these letters because my black layer is thin enough that I can see through it. Okay, so I'm just going to keep going on here. So I'm just making sure I've got all my little tails, all my little ups and downs areas of my letters. Okay, I'm almost there. I'm almost at the end. I'm trying not to dip it again because I don't want to get too much paint now that I'm almost finished. So I'm kind of just moving that paint around that's already on here so I don't have to re-dip it by the time I got to the end. Alright, so I'll kind of show you, kind of see how that coverage looks. Alright, now, again, you can wait for this part to dry, so you can give it a few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and peel it off. If you are going to peel it off while it's wet, you need to be very careful and confident that you do not drop the vinyl back down, okay? So as soon as you start peeling, you got to just keep going, okay? So I'm going to lift up and peel off. If the reason being, of course, if you drop it, then you could get some of that other black excess paint. It could touch back down on your white, and we don't want that to happen. But I'm going to do it to help it dry a little faster and for the sake of, making this video. Alright, so let me just kind of slowly peel up. Look at that. Looking good. Love it. Looks awesome. Okay, so this is wet, so I'm going to be careful. I'm going to set that aside. Alright, so, oh, look at that. Looks so good. Alright. Yay. that's ready. If you had anything peel up, or if you don't like, if there's any little spot you want to touch up with your white, like now would be a good time. You could touch it up just barely. Don't add a ton of anything, but if you have little spots you want to touch up, you could do that. You could do it nice and thin. Alright, so now I'm not going to peel the little insides of the letters right now, because when it's wet you definitely don't want to touch the insides. You can go back and do that later, and you can just use a needle if you want to, or you can even just use your fingernail, but just wait until it's dry, okay? Get all those little insides. But we're going to keep going so I can kind of show you what it's going to look like. Oh, let me put this black paint away. Alright. Now, it's time to get our glue done, and we're going to start just kind of assembling everything on the rest of the sign. Okay, so the first thing we're going to put on is our loop, and this is going to go underneath our bow. So if you forgot to do that, or if somehow you already have your bow on there, it's totally fine to glue this on the back. Okay, so it doesn't matter either way. I'm gonna glue it on the front of mine just so it's underneath the bow. Okay, so I'm going to just put some glue. I unplugged my glue. Hold on. I guess I had already unplugged it. Okay, my glue gun is not hot enough, so just give me just a second. So actually, I've got the time. Let me grab my little tool and I'll show you how to take the little letters out. Alright, so like I said, don't do this step until you're dry, okay? But you'll just take something sharp, like this is literally a stick with a needle on it, okay? So, very sophisticated. But we're going to go in here, I'm going to get all these little insides of these letters out. So just be real careful that you don't scratch your sign up, okay? I'm saying do what I say and not what I do, because you're not going to do this while it's wet, okay? But I'm going to do it for the sake of the fact that I unplugged my glue gun and I have nothing else to do at this point. Alright, so, and that would be good. That way you'll be able to see the whole look of the sign at the end without these little pieces. So I'm just going to go right up underneath the edge of that vinyl and then grab the piece and peel it off with my other hand. Okay? You got all these little loopy loops inside of your letters. And I think kind of peeling this up helps it to dry a little bit, but no rush. I think it kind of takes a little bit of a science to learn how to peel these things, but if you've done any of our vinyl work before, then you probably got this down pat. Alright, awesome. So you can really see what the welcome looks like. It looks so good. Okay. Now let's see if we can get a little bit of glue out of here. Alright. Perfect. Okay, so I just put like a dollop of glue on the back. I'm going to hold it up to make sure I can get it nice and straight. Put this loop on here. Okay? So again, just be careful when you're putting your fingers on there, just to kind of dab your fingers and pinch it slowly, just so you don't end up burning yourself through that ribbon. Okay? I'm kind of just holding it up and seeing that I've got that nice and straight. So you can see I just kind of put that on there. Alright, awesome. And now we have our bow. So I'm going to set my bow on here kind of just to see where it's going to go. It looks awesome. Alright, so now I just need a good deal of glue right in the center of the back of the bow. Let me just put some on there. Push down my glue stick. There we go. Alright, so I'm just going to put some glue here on the back. This will help just to hold everything together. Alright, so stand up real quick. Let me get this centered and straight. And then when I put it on there, I'm just going to hold it down for just a minute so that that glue can cool down and get stuck on there, okay? So then I kind of see that my ribbon loops, like I told you, I thought they might be a little bit too long. So I'm actually going to fold those again. And then I'm just going to kind of trim a little bit more off. So you definitely have some wiggle room. Oh, I say that, I'm trying to do it while I'm holding the bow down. Okay, so I'm going to trim that off and make that tail just a tiny bit shorter on these so that it's not hanging too much over the welcome. I want to be able to see that. Alright, so I'm going to trim this a tiny bit more. Alright, perfect. And you can just kind of move around that bow however you want, just fluffing that, making that look how you want that to look. So that looks great. Alright, so once that's nice and dry, just a minute, that should be stuck on pretty good. Alright, so again, so kind of here's where we are. So our last thing we're going to do is just add our floral. Really, you could just stick the floral pieces in there and then you kind of stay. But we're going to add a little bit of hot glue. So you should have 4 little pieces. So some people got a little bit different floral, so just depending on what you got in your kit. So you should have some kind of greenery. But you should have 4 stems or so. So I'm going to kind of look and see where I want these little thingies to go. So 2 on each side. Now I'm going to actually stick them in before I glue them, just so I can make sure that I like the way they look. And I'm just kind of shoving them right underneath the loops of the bow to come out. I don't want to cover too much of my of the welcome sign on the bottom, but just giving it a little bit of color on the top. Okay, so folding that over. If you've got a wire that's too long and you don't have something to clip it with, you could just fold it since it's getting stuck in there. You won't be able to see that anyway. So I just kind of folded that one a little bit. Alright, and like I said, I'm just kind of placing them in here so I can see if I like the way that they look. So I put them in there, see if I like that. And once I see that I like how they look, then I'm going to go back and I kind of pull the bow up a little bit. And I'm just going to add a little bit of hot glue in there. If it's too hard to reach in there, then you can just pull that out, put a little bit of hot glue on that stem, and then just lift up your bow, place it, and push it back down. Okay? So we're just going to hot glue that just a tiny bit to get all those pieces to stick together. Alright. Make sure you like the way that it looks around your wording and nothing's covering anything else up too much. Alright, we are almost finished. Alright, just a couple more seconds and we'll be all done. Alright, so I just kind of held that down and let that hot glue dry. And then I'm going to move my bow around just a little bit, curl it down, and there you go. You have a gorgeous welcome sign or a name sign to hang on your door or to give somebody as a Christmas gift. So I hope that you enjoyed our craft for this month and that I will see you next time. We do have a few more of these, so if you're interested in getting one of these for a Christmas gift, then just let me know and we can personalize this however we want. And yeah, I hope that you enjoyed yourself and I hope that you'll be able to tell your friends that you made something for them or that you made the decoration on your front door. Thank you so much. See you next month.